Good evening. If I could have everybody take their seats. Welcome. My name is Sue Watts, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our All Candidates debate for 2021. First, I would like to thank the Brockville Arts Centre and their staff and volunteers for allowing us to hold our event here this evening. I'd also now like to introduce our candidates for this evening. We have Michelle Taylor from the New Democrat Party, Michael Barrett from the Conservative Party, Alex Castle from the People's Party of Canada, and Roberta Abbott from the Liberal Party. I'd like to review the format for tonight's activities. I'll be presenting our candidates with questions. The lead candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. When the candidate is finished, or when the 2-minute time limit is up, the other 3 candidates will have a 1 minute to give a rebuttal. At the end of the rebuttal, the original candidate will have an opportunity to state their final position with a 1 minute time frame. We will be rotating questions between the candidates. Candidates have been pre-selected for their position before coming on stage. At the end of tonight's debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a final wrap-up. I'd like to introduce our timers for this evening. Jan Murray, Membership and Events Manager at the Brockville and District Chamber of Commerce. Kathy Paquette, our Accountant at the Brockville and District Chamber of Commerce. Chelsea Kerr, our Chamber of Commerce student for the summer of 2021. We also have some ground rules for everyone. They are as follows. No heckling. 1 political sign per candidate is allowed to be hung in front of the candidate's table. No additional signs will be allowed from anyone during the debate. No signs are permitted outside of the Brockville Arts Centre. If so, they will be removed. Time limitations will be strictly enforced. Candidates will see a green paddle when they have 30 seconds left, a yellow paddle when they have 10 seconds left, and a red paddle when their time has expired, at which time they must finish. If any candidate attempts to exceed their time, I will be stepping in and their mics will be turned off. Everyone must be seated in their assigned seat during the event due to fire regulations and COVID restrictions. At the end of the evening, we ask that you remain in your seat until a Brockville Arts Centre usher indicates otherwise. Please do not stand or attempt to exit the building until you have been instructed to do so. To maintain an orderly and safe exit, everyone will be guided, 1 row at a time as instructed by the ushers. Before we begin our questions, each candidate is asked to give a 2-minute opening statement. And according to the draw before the debate, I'd like to invite Michelle Taylor to begin.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. So for those who don't already know me, my name is Michelle Taylor. This is my 4th campaign. I first ran provincially back in 2018. I ran federally in the by-election later that year when our MP Gord Brown tragically passed away. Again, federally in 2019, and here I am again offering my service to you today. I am a forestry technician. I'm a mom of 4, and I'm recently a newfound student again. I'm back at school at Carleton studying law and Indigenous studies. My priorities in life and in politics are anti-poverty advocacy. I'm focused on people having access to the health care they need, the housing that they need, as housing is a human right and needs to be treated as such by government. I advocate for universal basic income, access to affordable childcare, and post-secondary education that's accessible to all. As your MP, you would not find a stronger ally for Labour, for LGBTQ2S community in our riding, for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. I don't play the political game, and I stand for accountability, and that's what you would find with me. We need to look beyond our privilege as candidates and as voters. I would also stand up for democracy and focus with the NDP on having first past the post gone, which was supposed to be gone in 2015. I hope you send me to the House of Commons as your MP. I would love to offer service. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask Michael Barrett to open with your remarks.
Thank you very much, Sue. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you this evening along with the other candidates who are running. It is, while an unfortunate time for an election to have been called, it is always good to see a healthy democracy, and that is embodied with having candidates from different parties offering a variety of perspectives to have a real conversation in our community. I've served as the Member of Parliament for our community since December of 2018, and prior to that served as a municipal councillor in Edwardsburg Cardinal. For those of you who don't know, I'm married with 5 young children, and my wife Amanda and I are quite busy, and she's a tremendous help throughout my work as an MP, but also in these elections that seem to be coming quite often in our community. This is our 3rd time to the polls in 3 years. And this time the choice is tremendously important. We are coming off of our back foot out of an 18 months of hardship for our whole country and certainly for our community. Businesses, families, individuals have had an incredibly challenging time. And now it's time to present Canadians with a plan. And I'm so excited to be able to answer your questions this evening and to talk about the plan that Canada's Conservatives are putting forward for our recovery. And I'll look forward to getting into those points in detail. And I ask you to give us a look. If you haven't voted for the Conservatives before, take a look. Our entire platform, our costed platform, is online. And it's an exciting time. I'm hopeful for our whole community. I'm hopeful for our country. And it's time that we secure our future together. And I thank you very much for engaging in the process by being here tonight and putting your questions forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Alex Castle, your opening comments, please.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy that we can continue to have open debates and share ideas, all of our ideas for Canada and our plans for the future. My name is Alex Castle. I've been given the opportunity to represent the People's Party of Canada for my home riding here. I'm not a polished politician. I'm just a regular citizen who's a father, husband, and local businessman. I'm running because I've had enough of politicians on both sides of the aisle pandering to special interest groups, selling out our citizens, seniors, veterans, and our sovereignty for votes. Any party who's promising new spending and programs to get your vote is selling you short. The long-term ramifications of government dependence have overwhelming consequences for our society. Socialism doesn't work. It never has, and it never will. A society that gives up a little liberty for a little security deserves neither and will lose both. As a small business owner, I understand the struggle that business has gone through over the last 18 months. We need to start to stand up for our small business. Many of us believe this, giving the power back to the people. Why vote for the PPC? All other parties are pro-carbon tax, pro-Paris Climate Accord, pro-restrictions to Canadian oil, pro-mask and vaccine passports. They're also pro-bloated government budgets. The PPC is not a Band-Aid party. We will streamline government, reduce business regulations, which have stifled businesses all over Canada, as well as reduce the debt which our current government has ballooned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I invite Roberta Abbott for your opening comments.
Thanks. Thank you to the Chambers of Commerce for arranging this event this evening. I think it's unfortunate our Green Party colleague did not join us. I understand she is doing so out of concern for COVID, but so I thank the Chambers and the Brockville Arts Centre for the precautions that you have taken in accordance with the health unit guidelines, I'm sure. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee First Peoples, and thank all of you for being here this evening. So about me, I am Roberta Abbott, and as you can see from the red sign and the matching red hair, I'm your Liberal Party candidate. I have been a public servant for most of my professional career. I spent about 15 years working for the Department of National Defense as an intelligence analyst. During that time, I did a tour in Afghanistan where, working with our allies, I mostly did force protection for our soldiers, and I was very proud to serve my country. I have served as a Gananoque Town Councillor, which taught me the value of community service and that essentially all issues are local issues. Now, my current profession, I am a mental health professional, a registered psychotherapist. I put myself forward as a candidate for the Liberal Party because I believe there is a lot at stake for our country and for our riding. We've all been through a great deal over the past 18 months. There's been a lot of tragedy and a lot of challenge for all of us, and I am proud of our Liberal government's response to the pandemic, to this once-in-a-century public health crisis. We've helped keep food on the table, keep businesses open, keep people able to pay their rents, and most importantly, get vaccines into Canadians' arms. So I believe this is a record worth defending, and it is the primary reason that I'm running. The other reason that I'm running, though, is that I believe this riding needs better representation, an MP who shares your values and puts you first, someone who listens to and understands your concern and will represent you well in Ottawa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to proceed to our first question. Michelle, if elected, what are your top 3 priorities for this riding?
Thank you for the question. So my top 3 priorities for the riding are not mine alone, and they've been told to me over and over by people that I've spoken to. They're business owners, they're just regular people like you and I, and they're the marginalized groups that so far are ignored by current representation and our federal government in Ottawa. Anti-poverty, as I mentioned in my introduction, is a huge priority here in this riding. You may not see that it's an issue, but it is. And I have had discussions with so many people who can't afford to fill a prescription when it's given to them by a doctor, and that's unacceptable. They can't afford preventative dental care and end up in the emergency room as a result, and that's unacceptable. We have homelessness in our riding. Again, you may not see it, but it's there, and that needs to be addressed. Housing is a human right. I firmly believe that, and I'm proud that the NDP does as well and is planning on addressing that. Affordable housing is also a big priority for the small business owners that I've spoken to, who say that they have a hard time getting employees to work for them because those employees don't have somewhere affordable to live. We need to make that a focus, and the NDP will. As well, I have heard from so many members of marginalized communities, LGBTQ2S, who do not feel represented adequately and listened to by our current MP, who feel left behind by the Liberal government. And I want to put myself forward as a strong ally for them, who will vote the way the vote should be done on issues that affect their human rights in the House of Commons. Thank you.
Michael.
Well, thanks very much for the question. 3 top priorities would be health care, and with health care, I'll just get onto it quickly, with a 6% increase in the healthcare transfers to Ontario, nearly $60 billion in increased healthcare spending over the next 10 years. We've seen the work that our healthcare professionals have done during COVID-19, and we need to properly resource them with a focus on mental health as well. We need to make sure we're getting people back to work by our job surge plan. We need to incentivize employers. That will include a 25% subsidy for wages for any net new hires over Q1, and a number of affordability measures, both to tackle the housing crisis, but also pocketbook issues, which include our plan for a December GST holiday to put money back into the businesses on our main streets. So healthcare, affordability, and of course, getting people back to work and getting our economy firing. Thanks so much.
Alex.
Thank you. Immediately, we need to phase out COVID supports. We need to get people back to work. Business can't hire people because we're competing with the federal government. Housing crisis. We need to slow immigration. We can't keep our citizens in houses. How are we going to help future generations and new immigrants in our future? Out of control spending, cutting red tape, these are all going to help slow the housing market. Discourage or end vaccine passports or mandates. End all future segregation that's going to go along with this.
Thank you. Roberta.
So boiling the issues of a riding down into just 2 or 3 is a really difficult task because we have, in spite of what some people might think, we have a pretty diverse riding. I've been traveling all over the riding. It's very large, and I've had wonderful conversations with so many people about their needs and about what their priorities are. As some of my colleagues have mentioned, I mean, housing is one of the things that's top of the list. Housing is a fundamental human right, and we absolutely have to be better at ensuring that people have affordable housing as well as housing that meets their needs for safety and comfort. Access to health care is huge. I met a family in Portland who are looking for a family doctor and having a really hard time, so we're putting money into more rural doctors and nurses. And completing our challenge against COVID. Unfortunately, as my colleague seems to think we should remove COVID supports, we need to keep those going for as long as they're needed to keep our economy moving forward and to keep this riding working.
Michelle, your rebuttal.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. So just to comment on some of the remarks of my colleagues, funding for people in healthcare and the policies the government should be doing to care for its citizens, those are investments. Those are investments in human beings, and that's always the right thing to do. As for immigration, we know that Canada needs immigrants. Our birth rate is not keeping up with filling jobs and so on and so forth, and that is absolutely something that should be encouraged. And as well, I just wanted to add on the focus of tackling climate change, and it does not have to be environment versus jobs. We can do both, and we can do it by focusing on sustainable industry. Thank you.
Our next question. Michael, you'll be the first to respond. If elected, how would you improve our regional economy, specifically pertaining to small and medium-sized businesses?
So this is a huge opportunity and challenge that we're faced with in terms of supporting businesses. I'm hearing daily, and heard it today from a business owner right here in Brockville, in fact, that they're having a tremendously hard time staffing their businesses. And so we're going to take a few steps that are going to support folks getting back to work, and that's going to help our businesses fire on all cylinders. So part of that includes, as I mentioned previously, that job surge plan. So we're going to subsidize any wages for net new hires over Q1 of this year. So that's a 25% subsidy. Now, folks who've been out of work for longer than 6 months who are hired would make that business eligible for up to a 50% subsidy. We also want to incentivize folks who can work to keep working, and that includes increasing the Canada Workers Benefit. And so that increase of about $2,800 per year works out to an extra $1 per hour for folks who are receiving the Canada Workers Benefit, and a household would benefit up to $5,000 in receiving that. And so incentives for businesses to hire, incentives for people to be at work, while we sunset the support programs that were needed at the beginning of the pandemic. But as we get our economy back and we work to get our economy back, we have to support those efforts. There's also a number of proposals in our fully costed platform that you can find at conservative.ca that include supporting our businesses, and that includes enhancing some of the loan programs and the forgivable amount for loan programs that small businesses are receiving. So now is the time for us to get on that front foot to support small businesses in our community, because we have a lot to offer, and now it's time for us to step up.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. Like I mentioned before, small business and medium-sized business are struggling to hire because they're competing with the federal government. This needs to end. We need to encourage people to get back to work immediately. Our debt is out of control. Lower tax rates. Changing to a flat tax rate once the mandate and the budget has been balanced with a PPC government. System to encourage hard work, the ambitious, and investment in our communities. Our system right now in the progressive tax system penalizes our most ambitious people in our society, and this needs to change. Every regulation that's introduced to each industry, I feel they should cut 2 other regulations to help business grow. And of course, the hot topic in the last election, end the carbon tax. It hurts the people the most. The big corporations aren't hurt nearly as bad as the small and medium-sized businesses.
Roberta.
Thanks. So I just want to put to rest, first of all, what my PPC colleague was saying about that businesses are competing with government supports for workers right now. It's simply not the case, because the government supports actually, when it works out, if somebody is trying to work full-time, it works out to less than minimum wage. It's not why people aren't going back to work, but it is what people needed in order to be able to pay their rent when they were laid off from their jobs because of lockdowns, which was understandable, and they needed that support. And it is being phased out except for those that are still needed. So, I mean, small businesses are struggling, and we know that, and we're continuing to have their back with the supports they need for as long as they need. But we do have a lot of plans to try to help small businesses. We have the lowest small business tax rate in the G7. We're putting money into apprenticeships and training and entrepreneurial grants for all types of small businesses. And we're seeing that in places like Gananoque, where all the empty buildings are now leased or sold.
Michelle.
Thanks very much. So as I mentioned, I've talked to a number of small business owners over the last few weeks, and again, they say that what they need the most is the affordable housing, and that's a priority for the NDP, and that's a priority for me. As well, our platform investment of pharmacare would also be a huge benefit to small businesses. It would save them approximately $600 per year per employee. So that would also be a great boost for small business owners. And again, we need to remember, when we're talking about jobs, it's not just about any jobs. People need good jobs. They don't want to be working 2 or 3 jobs just to get by. Workers cannot be subsidizing the businesses of their owners. They need to be paid well, they need to have good benefits, and they can't be working around the clock and still needing to go to a food bank. Thank you.
Michael, your rebuttal.
So some of the measures that we'd take focus on investing in small businesses, as I mentioned previously. And some of the things that we can do as part of those investments are supporting our skilled trades, and doubling the apprenticeship tax credit is one of those measures. We can introduce our Main Street business loans up to $200,000. We're also going to make reforms to the Business Development Bank of Canada, and making their programs and dollars more accessible to small businesses in our community, many of whom have benefited from our community development corporations. But we also need to make sure that there are options, and that we're giving businesses and entrepreneurs, the real job creators, the ability to get started and the ability to stay in business once they've started. So we're going to introduce a number of measures in support of small businesses, recognizing that they're our path out of this economy. They're the job creators. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Alex, you'll be the first to respond. With all the funds that have been allocated towards getting businesses and individuals through the pandemic since 2020, how does your party plan to work towards a balanced budget?
Thanks for the question. Of course, creating a flat tax system to encourage investment, also ending these or phasing out the COVID support payments. We believe that government is inefficient and should be reduced significantly, including costly UN treaties and Paris Climate Accord. This is how we budget our books and put Canadians first. We need to stop creating new spending bills These are Band-Aids. We need to cut so we can make sure our future is prosperous for all of us.
Roberta.
So what we're engaged in is an economic recovery. Our budget 2021 is fully fiscally responsible, it is sustainable, and it is credible. Our platform was fully costed out to ensure that the things that we are working for an economic recovery for our country are things that are reasonable and credible. We have maintained our AAA credit score as a country, and this took a great deal of leadership, and we're not out of this yet. But what we did for the pandemic is we stopped a flood of bankruptcies. Our GDP rose by 10% in the fall of 2020, and it has fluctuated somewhat, but right now it is on a growing trajectory. We will continue the supports and the resources as needed for seniors and students and families, but our economy is on the road to recovery, and we're putting money into innovation, into R&D for vaccines, and we're getting Canadians back to work safely, and growing our economy is our priority.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thanks very much. So one of my favorite aspects of the NDP platform is tax fairness, and that is desperately missing in Canada right now. You and I do not get away with not paying our taxes, yet it seems like the more wealth you have, the more loopholes you can find, and that's unacceptable. The NDP has a priority of closing those loopholes. Why should billionaires and millionaires be able to get away with what we can't? They hoard their money and then shoot themselves off into space. We also need to remember what taxes are for. In terms of cutting taxes, as my PPC colleague was mentioning, unless we're going to start building each our own hospitals, schools, and roads, that's probably not going to work. The NDP plan will raise taxes for those who can afford it, the millionaires and billionaires, not you and I, and those who have gotten away with paying nothing.
Michael?
We need to adopt a reasonable and measured approach to wind down the out-of-control spending that was happening pre-pandemic, and we need to, in a responsible way, sunset the pandemic recovery measures that have been in place, so those COVID recovery measures. We need to invest targeted stimulus. We need to leverage our growth and get ourselves back to balance. We're putting forward a plan that, based on conservative growth figures, will have us to balance in 10 years. But we were in a situation pre-pandemic that saw us with record deficits as well. So we need to make the right investments in our community. We need to sunset the current initiatives in a compassionate way, and we need to make sure that we're addressing the inflation crisis that we have right now, and that's going to do so much for the day-to-day affordability, everything from groceries to gas to housing.
Alex, your rebuttal?
Thank you. Yes, I would assume most MPs don't realize where money comes from. A simple question of where it comes from should be asked to all of our members. It's printed from chartered banks, from nothing. They charge interest on it. They lend it to the government, and we pay taxes to pay that interest. Socialism works great until all the money's gone. Healthcare is the GST. If you look at the transfers, what's created in GST revenue each year goes to the feds pay it back through transfers to the healthcare system. The federal government should get less involved with healthcare and let the provinces make their decisions and tax their provinces accordingly. A flat tax creates opportunities. The small and medium-sized businesses that we want to tax in excess creates jobs that each of us will be able to participate in, and that creates payroll tax. Thank you.
Next question. Roberta, you'll be the first to respond. What is your plan for managing the water levels on the St. Lawrence River Seaway?
Wow, okay. Interestingly, a question that comes to me first is not something that I have a great deal of expertise on. I recognize that we live along the St. Lawrence, and it is the border of the entirety of our riding, and climate change is a very real concern that has impacted the levels of the St. Lawrence as well as the levels of our other rivers within our riding, so that when we have had drastic flooding and drought in recent years, it has grossly impacted the commerce along the rivers and also the habitats along the rivers. But I have to admit that, this is unlike some of my colleagues here, this is my first time running as a federal candidate. And while I have been absorbing a great deal of information about our riding, this is one area that I don't have a lot of information about and would have to put a lot of work into learning more about, because I know it is an incredibly important resource and a situation that requires a lot of partnership at the federal, provincial, municipal levels, and also the international levels with our U.S. neighbors. So I promise you that if elected as your representative, it is something I will learn a great deal more about.
Michelle.
Thanks very much. So over the past couple of years, I've actually been to a number of meetings by interested residents on this issue out in Gananoque and in Brockville. I know it's a big concern. I know that they're definitely concerned about, their property and how sustainable that is, the damage that happens to it with the water levels. As I understand, those discussions are still in the works with the various partners, including on the American side, and I would certainly commit to being part of that conversation and advocating for the interests of residents here in our riding.
Michael.
The issue of Plan 2014 and the International Joint Commission has been one that's been really prevalent for our community for a number of years. And in hosting meetings with IJC co-chairs from both sides of the border and attending meetings on both sides of the border, it's clear that we need more transparency from the organization. They need to take part in meaningful consultations on both sides of the border. And we need to be able to have indications on what their plans are, and they also need to be prepared to be responsive based on the changes that have occurred over the course of a year. And so our appointee to that board, to the International Joint Commission, needs to be accountable and responsible to residents who are most affected. That involves partnerships with folks in our community, across the municipalities, with the province of Ontario, and they need to hold real consultations with their annual plans and on an as-needed basis in our community.
Alex.
Thank you. The PPC believes that the climate has continuously changed. The climate change has models from as early as 1970 have all ended up being incorrect. I'm on the river quite a bit. The river does increase in depth, and it does go down in different times of the years. This is not something that we can easily control with government intervention. Personal responsibility to manage properties on the riverways, making sure that we keep track of this is an important way for us to keep track of what happens in the future. But more government implementation of ideas and spending is not going to solve the St. Lawrence River increasing and decreasing in levels.
And Roberta, your rebuttal.
If I understand correctly from my PPC colleague, it sounds as though he seems to think that climate change does not have an impact on river levels, and I think that's an incredibly irresponsible way to look at what is an incredibly important resource in our riding and the source of a lot of economy as well as recreation for the people who live along it. As Michael Barrett has pointed out, I mean, he's had the privilege of being your member of parliament, and so he has been involved in the discussions and the planning around this issue, and what he mentioned with regard to accountability and responsibility really rings true as someone who lives in Gananoque, when as a municipality with boaters and people with homes along the river, what has happened with the St. Lawrence has sometimes been incredibly impactful for the people in our community. So I look forward to learning more about the issue and representing you on those organizing bodies that Mr. Barrett mentioned.
Thank you. Next question, Michelle, you'll be the first to respond. What is one key action item that you would implement tomorrow that would contribute to environmental sustainability?
So what we absolutely need to be focusing on, if I had to narrow it down to just one, is we need to get away from oil and gas. It's not sustainable. Even if you happen to agree with oil and gas, it's not going to be there for us forever, and we absolutely need to stop putting billions and billions and billions of dollars into oil and gas, and we need to be investing in clean energy. It's also incredibly frustrating that the federal government can seem to find no end of money to put pipelines across unceded Indigenous land, but they can't do the same with clean water. We need to stop subsidizing oil and gas. We need to invest in clean energy, and we need to do it now.
Michael.
I think that we need to have real partnerships when we're addressing the issues that are facing us. And you look at issues that affect us right here in our community, we still have municipalities dumping raw sewage into the St. Lawrence River. It's the source for our drinking water in Brockville, in communities along the St. Lawrence. And so that's one thing that we can do right away, is to stop the dumping of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence. It requires that partnership with the provinces, territories, with everyone. And this is the same approach we should take internationally with ending the scourge of plastics in oceans. And it's the same thing that we need to do across Canada with respect to the export of our plastics to other countries around the world. We can do better, we can be a leader, and that requires collaboration. The first thing, though, no one dumps raw sewage into our river.
Alex?
Thank you. I think, first of all, we need to use the money that we're sending billions of dollars to foreign countries to start focusing on cleaning our rivers, our lakes, taking care of invasive species. This is an issue all throughout Canada, but especially in our riding with the St. Lawrence River right at our doorstep. We need to focus on pipelines, making sure pipelines can get, we have the third largest oil reserve in the world, and we still drive transports and trains across the country to transport it, that burn diesel and coal. Pipelines are an efficient way for us to bring our oil to our markets and markets abroad. We need to encourage a free market for innovation, for sustainable energy for the future, not continue to pay green subsidies to corporations when only a few corporations receive this and only a few citizens enjoy the benefits. We need to encourage it with tax rates and deregulation of these industries. Thank you.
Roberta.
So I think that the issue that Michael keeps referring to about dumping raw sewage is an isolated incident that happened in Montreal some years ago. I don't think there's rampant dumping of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence, where the city of Montreal had to, as an emergency basis, take care of that, or it would be in the streets. But certainly, if there were some happening along that line, it would be a concern. It's really hard, again, boiling stuff down to just one thing. I think leadership is the one thing. I mean, leadership in all areas of climate change, which is something that we're doing. So working with experts, working across party lines to ensure that we have all of the best ideas possible, and working with Indigenous peoples for their expertise with regard to stewardship of the land and protecting as much land and water and ocean resources as we possibly can. And of course, we have to work to justly transition away from fossil fuels, which is something that we're doing by not just dumping hundreds of thousands of people out of their jobs, but ensuring that they have good, clean jobs.
Michelle, your rebuttal.
Thanks very much, and my goodness, I wish I had all night. We don't need to choose between prioritizing addressing climate change and jobs. The NDP plan to address climate change will not leave any worker behind. They can be retrained to be part of the sustainable energy field that we're looking to expand. The health of our planet is ultimately at the core and should be at the core of anything that we're planning on for the future. If we don't have the health of our planet, there's really not much point in talking about anything else. We need the leadership on it. The Liberals have had 6 years, 4 of them with a majority, to actually get things moving, and all they've done is put forth pipelines and subsidies for oil and gas. We need something different.
Next question. Michael, you'll be the first to address. What actions would your party put in place to achieve a higher national vaccination rate?
It's so important that when we're talking about an issue that concerns the public health of everyone in our country, that it's not one that gets politicized. And we've really seen that, unfortunately, over the last number of weeks. We've heard from public health experts that this is not an issue to drag, as a political football. And education over enforcement is really going to help us get where we need to be. Here in our community, we enjoy very high vaccination rates for people who chose to get vaccinated. It's over 90%, over 91%, I believe, at first dose, and over 87% of people over the age of 12 with 2 doses. And so anyone who can and wants to be vaccinated should. And that's so important. But education is the key to increasing vaccination rates. That's why we were so successful in vaccination campaigns with all of those childhood vaccines that so many, the majority of Canadians, have received and continue to receive. And this shouldn't be an issue of fear. We're in very challenging times where people have suffered many hardships over the course of a year and a half, and people are afraid. Many people have been isolated. So we need to offer education. And in place of vaccines for those who haven't been vaccinated, offering reasonable alternatives like rapid testing, which is, we have these medicines, we have these technologies that can help to keep us safe in the face of COVID-19. Let's use them. Let's work together. Let's not politicize an issue that doesn't need to be politicized. And that's how we're going to end COVID-19.
Alex.
Thank you. Yes, the PPC is not going to try to encourage or coerce anybody to have a medical procedure done or take an experimental drug. The vaccine mandates and passports is a form of segregation. We can see what's going to happen here in Ontario on the 22nd of September. My question is, why isn't the media reporting the truth? Why is people being censored? Why aren't doctors who are coming forward being censored? There needs to be an open discussion about this. Like Michael said, education is important. We need to see both sides. Rarely in the mainstream media do we see this. This is a core of our problem in the mainstream media that's been government funded for so long. We need to ensure that both sides of the story are heard so people can make educated decisions on whether they want to perform these medical treatments or not.
Roberta.
Mr. Castle, are you vaccinated?
That's between me and my... I can't. It's not on.
Yep. Okay. I believe you're about to say it was between you and your healthcare provider.
That's correct.
Okay. So vaccines save lives. And I support fully my government's decision and the province's decision around trying to encourage people to get vaccinated and to prove their vaccination status. It's not mandatory. Nobody is forcing anyone to get vaccinated, but I think we all know that it is the most important safety aspect for our communities and our loved ones. We saw what happened in long-term care to the elderly people who were living there and what does happen to our most vulnerable in our population. So we need to encourage people to do this to, as Mr. Barrett said, to end the isolation, because when we all want to be back together in close quarters, we need to ensure that we are all healthy and that we stay that way. So we are encouraging people to get vaccinated. We are imploring people to get vaccinated for their health and the health of their loved ones.
Thank you. So, segregation, huh? I'm sorry, but your historical education is seriously lacking if you're going to use the term segregation on something like this, and that is so deeply insulting to the marginalized communities that have actually faced that in their lives. I can't let that go unsaid. Anyways, speaking of vaccinations, Hospitals are overwhelmed. Healthcare workers are overwhelmed. We owe to them to make their lives easier. We have had vaccines as required all through school. This is nothing new. They are not experimental. They are safe. They need to be done, and they should be done. And I absolutely support restrictions on those who choose not to do them, but have no medical reason not to have them.
And your rebuttal, Michael.
So as I said, it's important that we make sure that we have all the tools available to get back onto our front foot coming out of the last 18 months that we've had. And there are great initiatives, and we've seen the deployment of rapid testing to small businesses to give employers confidence with having their employees back at work. And that's a great initiative that's been used right here in our community in partnership with the Chambers of Commerce. So we need to continue to leverage tools like rapid testing. And for folks who wish to and are able to be vaccinated, to make sure that those vaccines are available to them. This is how we're going to overcome the challenges of COVID-19, by leveraging all of the research and funding that's gone into both the vaccine, but also rapid testing.
Next question. Alex, you'll be the first to respond. Residents of long-term care homes have been especially vulnerable to COVID. In addition, the pandemic has illuminated many deficiencies in our provincial system. What role can the federal government play to ensure that our elderly citizens receive proper care?
As mentioned earlier, the federal government is not in charge of the healthcare system in each province. This is a provincial issue, but the encouragement of the funds that are being spent to focus on long-term care, unfortunately, throughout this pandemic, a light has been shone on some of the deficiencies that these systems have in place. And it's unfortunate because I really hope the governments take the ball from here and continue on. I think that the security of our seniors, security of their family members, and security of their health is absolutely paramount. And I think we need to continue to focus on the fact that the provinces need to deal with this individually with the encouragement of the federal government.
Roberta.
So what happened in long-term care homes with the pandemic was tragic and unconscionable, and absolutely we have to do everything possible to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. My mom, who's 84 years old, who is here tonight, but was out in BC for quite a bit of the pandemic, I was nervous all the time as to her health and when she was going to get vaccinated. PSWs in long-term care were fearful, so we're putting money into wages and training for more PSWs, and so that they have a much better wage, so that when they're working in long-term care, they're safe and that they are doing the work that they need to do. We're also putting $3 billion over 5 years into long-term care standards, working with the provinces and the municipalities to ensure that the homes have the best standard of care they possibly can. Because this is something that we cannot get wrong again. We have to ensure the health of our elders and respect them, because you know what, you get there a lot quicker than you think. So this is all of us down the road.
Michelle.
Thanks very much. So as we saw very acutely here in Ontario with the Army needing to go into the long-term care homes here and essentially rescue the seniors that were there, we obviously need a higher standard of care, and we need to standardize that across Canada. The NDP is committed to doing that as part of the platform, because we need to ensure that a senior in Ontario, in BC, in Newfoundland, everywhere is going to receive quality care. We also need to take away the for-profit care and have it all under a public system, under these standards, where everyone knows what kind of care that they will expect, regardless of what province they're in Canada or territory.
Michael.
Governments need to prioritize the health and safety of everyone living in long-term care homes. Seniors deserve to live with dignity. And we're going to work with the provinces and territories to develop a national set of best practices. With respect to concrete action that we can take, we're going to invest $3 billion to upgrade and renovate long-term care homes so that they can meet the needs of the residents who are there now. It's heartbreaking to have seen the images and to read the reports of what happened in long-term care homes. And it's a call to action for all of us. We owe a debt of gratitude to the folks who continue to work and care for our seniors in those homes, as well as our Canadian forces who, in an unprecedented move, had to be called in to support those workers. Having seen that, we need to learn the lesson, make the investments, work with the territories and provinces to make sure our seniors can live with dignity.
Alex, your rebuttal.
I agree with what I had mentioned before. The provinces are primarily responsible for this. They should be encouraged by the federal government. The healthcare transfers for the system has doubled since 2006 from 20 to 43 billion. Our economy and our budget cannot afford for this ballooning amount to continue out. Each province should be collecting taxes to ensure the wait times and to ensure the care for long-term care homes, hospitals, clinics, etc. Continue to be prosperous, and the Canadians can rely on this in the future. Thank you.
Next question. Roberta, you'll be the first to reply. There is an opioid drug crisis in this riding. In a 10-day period between July 16th and July 26th, there were 4 opioid-related deaths in Leeds and Grenville, which is unprecedented. What strategies would you implement to address this?
Thanks. So, I mean, this is an issue that requires a holistic response. As a mental health professional, I know that addiction and mental health are really complex issues that we have to address from a variety of perspectives. Opioid addiction is a whole other aspect than what we are used to dealing with addiction, and the ballooning numbers are tragic, and we are seeing it more and more in all socioeconomic backgrounds and areas of our society. So we need to deal with it head on from the perspective of it being different from other addictions, but we also need to deal with it holistically the way we deal with other mental health and addiction issues, looking at housing, looking at employment, looking at healthcare generally, looking at whether there are any law and criminality issues around it, and looking at it from a healthcare perspective to make sure that we deal with it as healthcare and not as a criminal aspect. Working with physicians and working with hospitals and healthcare providers, and ensuring that, that there are pain management methods that ensure that people don't get into addictions with opioids. So it's an incredibly complex issue that we are looking at from a wide range of perspectives. Our government is putting a lot of money into mental health, and we are meeting the opioid addiction challenge head on, working with all partners and ensuring that, this is something that we're starting to make inroads in. We see it particularly out west, and we are seeing it now here. So yes, it's a very important issue for us to deal with urgently.
Michelle.
Thank you. So the NDP would call a national emergency on the opioid crisis as it is right now, and it needs to be addressed as such by the federal government. We'd also look at working with provinces and municipalities to address the issue as best we can. We need to look at things like safe injection sites. We need to be helping people as best we can without judgment. And I'm actually excited to see that there's a group that's formed in Brockville that is addressing the issue from a holistic perspective with various community partners involved, and I would certainly be interested in sitting down with them to hear their perspective about the issue here locally.
Michael.
Every person struggling with addiction deserves the opportunity to recover from their addiction and to lead a life free from drugs. And we need to make investments. We need to support them. We have a great group here in this area that has a municipal drug strategy that involves partners to do that, but they need help. A Conservative government would invest $325 million over 3 years for 1,000 residential drug treatment beds. We would build 50 recovery community centers across Canada. And there would be, of course, money to support the provinces in equipping our first responders with naloxone. With the number of deaths that we're seeing from opioids, this is a crisis, and we need to take urgent action, and it's something that I am seized with and very much think it's worth our investment.
Alex.
I personally don't have a lot of experience with this. Like I said, this is my first time in this role. But I believe regulating big pharma, they have introduced a lot of these addictive drugs to our society over the last many years. As we all know here, lockdowns have increased based on the question here. The lockdowns have increased the usage and the mental health and addiction crisis we have in our communities. That's one of the reasons the PPC is against lockdowns and these authoritarian measures. We need to speak to experts who are already in the industry. Instead of appointing new people in government, unelected bureaucrats, speak to people who have these businesses, who have been in the fields to get their opinions on how to handle this. We need to ensure citizens have the supports they need to recover and get on the path of life that they want. Thank you.
Roberta.
I think some of the things that my colleagues have mentioned are worth repeating and worth reinforcing around the urgency of the issue, as Michelle mentioned, about safe injection sites and the fact that those help people to manage addiction and to be able to safely get off addiction. We need to work at also ending homelessness so that if people are facing substance abuse issues that they don't have to worry about their housing. We need to work with first responders who are dealing with this situation and dealing with overdose issues because their mental health is at risk as well in what they're doing. So I think it's as I said, it's an incredibly complex problem that we need to tackle from a wide variety of angles, and it is very urgent.
Next question, Michelle, you'll be the first to respond. COVID has exacerbated an existing mental health crisis in this riding and elsewhere. What role can the federal government play in mitigating this crisis?
Thank you very much for the question. And again, mental health right now, as it stands with the health coverage that Canadians have, is not included, and that's a big problem. So you have people who recognize that they need help and they can't afford to get it, and that's unacceptable. When healthcare came to be back in the 50s through Tommy Douglas, it was never meant to be exclusionary of mental health, of teeth, of eyes, of ears. Mental health is part of health, and it needs to be respected as such under the Canada Health Act. The NDP absolutely commits to include it. People need to be able to access resources, and right now they can't, and we're seeing the result of that. Part of that as well is anti-poverty initiatives, UBI, again, the expanded health care, child care. When people have a stable foundation in their lives and don't need to worry about how they're going to make it to tomorrow, that already is a big contributor to improved mental health. I absolutely see it as a serious issue. The NDP does as well, and our platform is absolutely targeted to address it.
Michael.
We're going to massively increase healthcare transfers to the provinces with nearly $60 billion in increases over 10 years. We're going to partner with the provinces to invest some of those funds into mental health care. We're going to work with private businesses. We're going to encourage the private sector to offer mental health care supports to their employees. We're going to provide $150 million over 3 years in grants to nonprofits and charities delivering mental health and wellness programming. And as we did in the last Parliament, partnering with other opposition parties, we're going to introduce a 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. Same 3 digits, coast to coast to coast, 988. And that's so important. It passed through in this last Parliament. Now it's time to act on that, make those services available. This is going to require real partnership between the federal government, the provincial governments, and territories.
Alex.
I believe we need to incentivize and encourage the private sector to encourage insurance companies to make coverages in place to deal with this, not just federal employees or provincial employees, but insurance companies created a market for employees. It doesn't make any difference what industry or what business they're in. We need to encourage this. A society of fear, unfortunately, is what we live in now. Through media, social media, our education facilities, telling the children in the future that they won't have a world to live in. This doesn't help. The world's going to burn up in 12 years. These are the kind of comments that eventually deteriorate somebody's mind and creates the fear that I hope will end, and we'll continue on the path to encouraging people in our country to be happy and prosperous. Thank you.
Roberta?
So yes, COVID did certainly exacerbate people's mental health concerns. People were fearful for their health and others, and they were in isolation. As a mental health care professional, I certainly saw that with my clients, and with an increase in clients reaching out for supports, and unfortunately a lot of people not reaching out for supports. Which is something that we have to put a lot more effort into, is destigmatizing having help for your mental wellness. It needs to be preventative. It needs to be absolutely part of healthcare through and through, so that we help our children to understand their resilience and help at both ends of the age spectrum, so that seniors also have better mental health care supports. We are putting money into veterans' mental health and wellness with their families. We're putting money into the healthcare system for mental health supports. So we are definitely addressing it head on, and as a mental health care professional, I know how incredibly important it is.
Michelle, your rebuttal?
Thank you. So I just want to touch on a couple of comments made by my colleagues. Just starting with vets, that one stood out to me. Veterans, we know that the Liberal government is leaving money unspent every year that should be going to services that our veterans required. Putting mental health care onto insurance companies, what does that do for people who don't have insurance? Again, what the NDP platform has, and what I'm incredibly proud of, is that you will be able to access, every Canadian will be able to access mental health care and all the resources that come with that with their health card as opposed to their credit card. And that is what's needed.
Next question will be for you, Michael, to start. What are your planned actions toward addressing homelessness and the housing crisis in this riding?
The Government of Canada is the holder of a lot of land and a lot of buildings. And so we're going to free up some of those and repurpose them for residential housing. That's first of all. We're also going to ban non-resident foreign home ownership. We have this shouldn't be, the housing market in Canada shouldn't be the investment vehicle for people who don't intend to live here and don't occupy those homes, many of them sitting empty. We also need to change mortgage stress test rules. For example, when people are transitioning from refinancing a mortgage from one to another, they have to pass the stress test a second time, already being a mortgage holder. So we need to push the banks to be competitive, and that's going to help relieve some of the pressure as well. But really, we need to build more houses. That's the key. And making sure that we're building houses near transit, making sure that we're leveraging the land that the federal government has. This is so important to address this issue. We're going to incentivize anyone from a foreign country who does want to invest in our real estate market to do it in purpose-built multi-residential units. We're also going to invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create more housing. It's so important that over the coming years and months that we make real investments and we free up these spaces that are in some cases currently left vacant, and the federal government's land holdings can absolutely be leveraged to relieve the pressure. Thanks.
Alex?
Yes, this is a crisis across our riding and across the country. Young people all over aren't able to enter the real estate market. They may never enter the real estate market. I have 3 children coming up, and I don't know how they're going to buy their first home if things continue on the path they are. We need to stop the root of the problem. We need to lower immigration levels, focus on economic immigrants, people we need in our society. Multi-use zoning. I'm not sure if anybody's tried to build a home in the past in Ontario or anywhere else, but multi-use zoning needs to be corrected in our municipalities. This needs to be encouraged by the federal government. So you can build a multi-use home on a rural lot, for example, which will increase, of course, the housing because it is a supply and demand issue. Inflation by out-of-control government spending in the last, let's call it 20 years, has caused the rent increases and the cost increases, and of course wages have not kept up with this. So it's very difficult for someone to enter the market.
Roberta?
So housing is a basic right, and for the first time in Canada, we developed a national housing strategy in our Liberal government. We have tripled our investment in ending homelessness, and I would like to see us be even more ambitious. We have made a pledge to reduce homelessness by 50% over the next 10 years, and I think we can do even better than that. It is a mental health issue. It's a barrier to employment. It is such an important aspect of everyone's lives. We are putting a lot of effort into changes in the housing market because as I'm going around the riding, that's what I'm hearing from everybody is even people moving from cities to our riding are finding the cost of housing high. And while it has been an investment for a lot of people over the years, when we're at a crisis point like this, we have to meet it head on by ending things like blind bidding, by coming up with novel ideas like rent-to-own processes for renters to be able to become home buyers.
Michelle?
Thank you. So again, I'm just going to quickly respond to one of the comments made by my colleague. Bringing everything back to an anti-immigration rhetoric, I find dangerous and offensive, and I would like to mention that right now. Immigrants are nothing but a benefit to our society. In terms of the NDP housing plan, we are committing to build more affordable rental units across the country, at least 500,000 units over the next 10 years, and half of that in the next 5 years. In the first 100 days of an NDP government, we would create a housing strategy in collaboration with Indigenous peoples to make sure that they get the housing that they need. We would look at partnership with provinces and municipalities, build capacity for social, community, and affordable housing providers, and provide rental support as well. This plan to build so many...
Thank you. Michael, your rebuttal, please.
It's incredibly important that we are able to implement our plan to build 1 million homes over the next 3 years. As I said, part of that is going to be done with unlocking at least 15% of the 37,000 buildings owned by the federal government for housing. We're going to ban foreign investors from buying homes if they're not planning to live here, and partnering with municipalities to make sure that we can address the cost of the soaring rental market so that they can bring new rental units onto the market. We have a very serious disparity between supply and demand. This all comes down to new units, and also, in support of that, making it easier for first-time home buyers to get into the market with a mortgage.
Next question. Alex, you'll be the first to address this. From a June 4th Financial Post article, Statistics Canada found 4.1% of jobs in this country, an estimated 632,700 positions, were vacant in March, the latest month for which this data is available. That's roughly 100 basis points higher than pre-pandemic levels. Of the sectors that are most affected, the hospitality sector posted the highest vacancy rate in March with 7.4% or 68,400 unfilled jobs. How would you attract prospective employees to fill the job vacancies in this region?
Thanks for the question. As I mentioned before, we would phase out COVID support payments. We need to focus on getting people back to work. The incentive at the end of the month after their payroll taxes in a hospitality or a retail job is negligible. So there may be no purpose for them to continue going to their job. So if we incentivize people to get back to work, of course, this is what our goal is. And I believe that is the most important piece to this. We need to stop the spending. We need to make sure people have the incentive to be at their jobs, to carry on. That's how we're going to save these small and medium-sized businesses in our riding, by getting people at the door working. Thank you.
Roberta.
So I read an interesting article a little while ago about that was from a former hospitality worker regarding why she did not go back to her job post-pandemic, and it had nothing to do with the fact that she was receiving CERB or EI. It was because the conditions of employment and some of the other issues that she faced in that employment and the wages were inadequate for her and were difficult for her, and she found a better job. There were, as coming out of the pandemic, there has been a broadening of employment opportunities across a lot of sectors. My own stepdaughter stopped working at Dairy Queen and is now a cleaner in a long-term care home because she makes more money. So, you know, there is a lot of job vacancies, and we need to get to the bottom of it and figure out what it's about and help young people and people at that intersection of low wage to have good paying jobs and good job conditions and get people back to work.
Michelle.
Thank you. So it frustrates me to hear people refer to those who have been needing the CERB and CESB and so on as lazy and not wanting to go back to work. We need to be thinking about jobs in terms of living wages. Again, it is not reasonable for people to work 1, 2, 3 jobs just to be able to pay their basic bills. We need to look at wages, and they absolutely need to be living wages. Also, if you look at the evidence that supports UBI, that is also an incentive to get people to put people back to work. Generally speaking, when people collect UBI, they do not just sit at home. They still want to go out and be productive in the workforce. Anti-poverty needs to be looking at the jobs people have and making sure that they're not needing to stop at a food bank on the way home.
Giving workers making less than $28,000 a year a $1 an hour raise is one of the things that we're going to do in enhancing the Canada workers' benefit. For a household, that can be up to $5,000. Also increasing payments to folks receiving the CWB who are getting the disability supplement, increasing those as well. And not paying these out at tax time as a refund, but making those payments by direct deposit quarterly. But also enhancing and creating requirements for employers in the gig economy to make sure that they're making contributions equivalent to CPP and EI premiums into a savings account for folks who are working those jobs. We know many people with those side hustles, and we need to make sure that they're not left on the margins without the supports for time off, and whether it's to be sick because they're sick or because they need a vacation. So we need to make sure that we're standing up for all workers.
Alex, your rebuttal.
As my colleague mentioned about my comments about people being lazy, of course that's not whatsoever what the PPC would say about any individual who looked at the end of the month and made sure that they were taken care of and their COVID support payments would take care of them more than working. The lifetime welfare programs that some of our citizens in our communities have utilized is direct evidence that there is individuals who would rather not work and receive payments from the government. So that there may be evidence otherwise, but we have evidence on this as well. Also, vaccine mandates will cause another barrier for these people to re-enter the workforce. Individuals who don't want to disclose or have their employer know what their personal medical decisions were will be another large hurdle we will see unfold as time goes on. I've had literally hundreds of constituents reach out to me and ask me how they're going to handle this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final question for tonight, Roberta, you'll be the first to respond. How is your party going to pay for all of your campaign promises?
Okay, interesting way of putting that. We haven't been making campaign promises that are not already contained in our budget and in our fully costed platform. We have been making announcements. The Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers of our government have been spending time out in the country and talking to voters and telling them what we are going to do in ways that have already been fully planned out and fully costed in a budget and a platform that creates a system and creates a means of getting from one issue to another and addresses all of the most urgent needs of Canadians. We have looked at climate change, we have looked at issues of healthcare and seniors and mental health and housing and physical wellness and infrastructure and working with Indigenous peoples and all of the major priorities that are addressing Canadians right now. And this has been fully planned out in Budget 2021. When I became a candidate and read through our budget, I found myself feeling really optimistic and really excited about the things that we have planned out. And the way that it is costed, and in spite of having to spend a great deal of money on helping people to get through COVID, the economic recovery that we have planned out is realistic and sustainable. It is not magical thinking, as some parties have projected what they plan to do in terms of balancing the budget. It is actually looking at what is possible based on projections of economists and experts and knowing what our country can afford and the trajectory it's on and how we're going to get there. So these aren't empty promises. They are fully economically viable and sustainable costings.
Michelle.
Thank you. This is actually my favorite question of any debate. The NDP absolutely has a plan for that. If you look at investment in preventative care, it is always less expensive than having to deal with an acute situation later. I give you the example of someone who is prescribed something by their doctor. They cannot afford to fill the prescription, or perhaps they fill it and take half doses. They're going to end up in the hospital, and that's going to cost our system far more money than if we had just paid for the drugs up front. Investment in people, investment in services, and taxing those in particular who have profited off the pandemic and who, generally speaking, don't pay taxes as they should, closing those loopholes provides billions of dollars to the public purse.
Michael.
So we're going to adopt a reasonable and measured approach to balance the budget over the next 10 years. And we've used conservative figures to do that. But once we engage Canada's recovery plan and increase our growth, I fully expect we'll be able to balance it sooner. We need to rein in the deficits to address inflation and the rising costs of necessities like groceries and gas, as I mentioned before. But we have to wind down the emergency spending that's currently in place, and we're going to offer different incentives, as I mentioned before, whether it's with the Canada Workers Benefit or our job surge offering 25% subsidy to the wages for net new hires over Q1 this year. So we're going to sunset the previous pandemic measures, and we're going to get our economy firing on all cylinders, and that's how we're going to get ourselves back to balance.
Alex.
All these parties have promises we can't afford. PPC isn't promising anything. We will reallocate funds to citizens' care, services in our country. But freedom, free market, incentive for the free market, lowering taxes, scrapping carbon taxes, and promoting personal rights and responsibilities. We cannot continue on our path. We will be bankrupt and will be unable to sustain future generations. Thank you.
Roberta, your rebuttal.
Just on that very last point there, the measures that we put in place through COVID actually stopped a flood of what would have been bankruptcy. So we are not headed into bankruptcy, neither are the businesses in this riding. And just to reiterate some of the more important economic points and to kind of bring it back to the local, we will continue to support entrepreneurs and to support small businesses in our riding. We'll continue to support green innovation and hopefully bring more of those jobs to our riding. We have green businesses here that are doing innovative work, and we will continue to support them. We will continue to remove barriers to employment so that people in this riding can work, like women who need affordable childcare. We've developed programs across the country with provinces and territories to create $10 a day childcare, which will remove a barrier to employment, as well as working on housing and all of the various other supports that people in this riding need to.
Thank you. That wraps up our debate for 2021. I'd like to thank our candidates for joining us and for your time. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to Cogeco and our viewers at home who participated there. Thanks on behalf of the Brockville District Chamber of Commerce, and have a fantastic evening.